Hi, I'm Matthew from the Rhodes Business School. We're here to talk today about the governing body and what it says about it all in the new King IV report. Now, this is a distinct change in approach to management, and we've got to understand what King is banging off about. So let's start off with the application of King. King says, basically, I apply to everybody. Companies, NGOs, governments, local authorities, even universities, pension funds and retirement funds. And it's not enforcing it, it's not the law. It's a set of guiding principles. And basically what's happened is today we don't talk about a board of directors, we talk in an all-encompassing form about a governing body. Governing body can be a board of directors, the trustees of a pension fund, the council of a university. Who cares? It's just a set of guiding lines and ideas. But there are fundamental changes in King IV. In King III, which was published in 2009, there were 75 overriding principles. That was a hell of a lot. Now they've tried to reduce that down and compact it to 17 principles of management and how we govern businesses and any type of organization. And what it says is, instead of in King III, it went on the basis of apply or explain. You only explain why you didn't use these principles, basically, if something goes wrong. We go to a new principle, which is very loosely described as apply and explain. We want to explain to the world how we're operating so that they can have confidence in the way that we are working. So it goes something like this. Let's talk about the evolution of governance. So, hundreds of years ago, you got the shareholders or owners of a business. And as the business grew, it became unmanageable by a small group of people. Otherwise, we would have stayed with things like partnerships. But nobody could cope. So then came the idea of a company or a body. Basically, a fictitious person, basically a body corporate. It's not a natural person. It's a, if you want, lifeless body that people have to breathe life into. But the body contains the rules and owns everything. And the body in the old days used to be run by what we called a board of directors. They were the management. They were, if you want, the 10 fingers and thumbs and all the rest of it that run a company. And that's how it ran for many years. What happened was that the board of directors effectively got dominated. And also coming into the picture today is a position about what about everybody else in society? It's not only the people that own a business, it's also the stakeholders. And that's basically society. What are their interests in a company? Now, this is where it gets very tricky because management is on a far wider perspective than we used to look at it. So what we get is in the old days with old structures, we had dominant characters, the likes of Lee Iacocca. He ran his board of directors. He was in charge. He was driving the bus. If he wasn't the chairman, he was the chief executive officer. These massive characters that dominated the board of directors. In a way, we see this with Trump today. Very much the dominant character in running an organization. We don't particularly want that in King IV. We're saying, hang on, there's a different way of managing these entities. So the new structure that we propose in King IV goes essentially on a very different basis. We talk about a governing body. Yes, it has a chairperson, it also may have a CEO. But they're not the dominant characters that they used to be, because they represent the board. They don't represent themselves. And then we also fill that board up with non-executive directors, people who are not involved in the daily management. And they are actually the majority today, who work with the directors, overseeing what they are doing. And together we run this far closer to being a democracy than some form of dictatorship that we used to have. But of course, a governing body can't do it all. There's just not enough time in a day. So now the governing body has to delegate. It says we have to have committees of the governing body that report to the governing body, and the governing body must take ownership of their work. So we have an audit committee. They've been around for a few years. Then we will have a social and ethics committee, and a risk committee, and a remuneration committee. Even if you want, all governed by the nominations committee. How do we appoint all these people? How do we select them? All of that has to go into setting up a board that runs an organization today. That's the very start of King IV, is how do we get a board that is representative of not only the owners of the business, but also the stakeholders and society. We can even also have company secretaries and external consultants that we can use in this, but they all have to be coordinated. So, King IV starts off with, you must appoint a governing body. The governing body then assumes responsibility for its composition. Now that's very important. The buck does not stop with the CEO or the vice chancellor or the chairman. It stops with the board. They must take total responsibility for what they're doing. And they must set the direction of the organization and approve the processes that are required, using a balance of skills and knowledge, experience, diversity, and independence to objectively and effectively discharge their governance roles and responsibilities. So, what King is doing is it's putting a huge amount of responsibility on the governing body. They're saying, you've got all of these resources at your disposal, but don't forget one thing. You are always responsible collectively for the best interests of the organization. So the governing body continues. The governing body should comprise a majority of non-executive members, most of whom are independent. These are people who come from outside. They have no vested interest in the outcome of how the organization is going to operate. Otherwise, they will be biased in the way that it operates. So we have to go out there and find independent people with the skills and knowledge to make a contribution in the governing body. And then we have to look at all relevant factors to conclude that a member of the governing body is an independent non-executive member. Now, there are all sorts of tests on this in the King IV report. They're mainly looking at corporates who have various positions where a director might not necessarily be independent. But when we're running, for example, a pension fund or a university, again, independence is vital. We don't want to have this position that we have a fractured board which says this guy's representing this and this guy's representing that. We are wanting members of a board who are independent, who will listen to all the stakeholders and then come to a well-informed decision. Now, when one looks at independence and these members, non-executive members of a governing body may be categorized as being independent, and we have to conclude that there is no interest or position or association or relationship which a reasonable person looking at that person could interpret as being non-independent. It's absolutely essential that we take these vested interests out of the board, because we do not want a position where any member of the board is in a position to unduly influence or cause bias within the board. All board members must be independent and looking for one thing and one thing only: what is in the best interests of the organization. And there it is in recommendation number 27. So, King goes on from this. He says, we want diversity targets in determining the number of members of the governing body. We want diversity because that is the only way that we can truly get to the bottom of the interests of all stakeholders. So when one looks at the number of board members that you have in an organization, the King IV report doesn't say you'll have 2 there and 3 there and 4 of this type, etc. They say it's up to you. But use the factors. Say, I want an appropriate mix of knowledge, skills, and experience, including business, commercial, and industry experience needed to govern the organization. And there must be an appropriate mix of executives who run the organization and non-executives and independent non-executive members. The need for a sufficient number of members is the need that we have to run the organization and all the committees that are underneath it. It's not fixed or entrenched in stone. It's purely on a basis of necessity. Then we carry on further. We need to have enough members of the board so that we can always secure a quorum of members when we have meetings. We must have enough members to fill the regulatory requirements. And we also need to look at the diversity of the board, and so we get the right composition to represent everybody who has an interest in the organization. King IV goes even further. It says we have to embrace race and gender representation in the governing body. We must look at that as one of the key issues in how many people do we appoint to the board. We need to do this in the interests of better decision making and effective governance. But we must also never lose sight of the fact that we need the skills and experience as well as age, culture, race, and gender representation. So the governing body, even if it can't achieve that today, has got to say, by year so-and-so, we are wanting to make sure that we have a board that is representative of our members' interests and everybody who is involved in this organization. So, when all of this is done, then the governing body has to sit down and say, now, what are we doing with ourselves? And it's no good for them to just go and make decisions and execute these decisions. They've now got to go out and put out a body charter. They've got to say to the world, the governing body is here, and it's going to show how its role and responsibilities and membership requirements and all its procedures are put into place by writing out a charter. If you want a mission statement, if you want a strategic plan as to how that whole company or institution is going to operate. And that must be made available for all to see so that people can get confidence in the organization. So in the next series, what we'll do is we'll have a look at some of the characters. How do we appoint a chairman of the board? What are his obligations and responsibilities? How do we appoint a chief executive officer? And how does he report back to his board and to his chairman and all the rest of it? Join me then. Thank you for your attention.